Greetings, Inland Empire, and welcome to yet another edition of Political Empire. I'm your host, Kim Pierceall with the Press Enterprise and PE.com, and we've got quite a few headlines today. We're going to talk a little bit about the close race in the judicial contest. Also, how many folks voted from home? Were you one of them? Who's endorsing the Riverside mayor, and also some more endorsements that might be pretty interesting. And later on in the episode, we're going to be talking to our correspondent in Washington, D.C., who's going to tell us a little bit about a blame game that's occurring right now between two candidates running for Congress, and also what's going on in the Fast and Furious case. And no, it does not involve Vin Diesel. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about the close race that's going on for a judge's seat in Riverside County. The lead that Riverside County Superior Court Judge Craig Reimer had over supervising Deputy District Attorney John Henry is so close that it squeaks. On June 6th, the day after the election, Reimer led Henry with 51.26% of the votes against Henry's 48.74%. But that's when about 49,000 ballots were still uncounted. Now that those have been counted, the lead is with Reimer with about 50.86% of the vote and Henry with 49.14% of the vote. The Riverside County Register of Voters office says it still has about 7,000 uncounted provisional ballots to process. Those new figures are expected on Friday, June 22nd, so very close race there. Voting from home apparently was pretty popular with folks this year. Riverside County Register of Voters Carrie Virgil said that more voters than ever before requested vote-by-mail ballots. More than 422,000 ballots were sent out to homes in Riverside County. Granted, only 168,000 were returned for the June 5th primary. Turnout was low, but it is expected to pick up for the November election, and she expects to certify the primary results by the end of the month. San Bernardino County expects to certify its election results next week. Total turnout there was 23.8% of that, about 14.8% by mail, 8.22% at voting booths. So folks actually going out to the voting booths and casting their ballot there. Mayor endorsements, now that Rusty Bailey and Ed Atkinson are the last two candidates standing in the race for Riverside mayor, the endorsements are starting to line up. And first in line is Mike Gardner, sitting Riverside councilman who represents downtown and who was also running for mayor for the primary, has now officially endorsed Rusty Bailey. So we're going to be keeping an eye on other endorsements that the two will receive going forward into November. Also, more endorsements. This one, the San Bernardino County Safety Employees Benefit Association, which endorsed Neil Derry back in his first run for San Bernardino County Supervisor and gave him $400,000 at the time, is now endorsing his challenger, James Ramos. The union that represents public safety officers, including sheriff's deputies, has officially endorsed San Manuel, former chairman of that tribe, James Ramos. So we'll be following that as well. Those two are going to be vying for the San Bernardino County Supervisor spot in the November general election. And like I mentioned before, we're going to be speaking to our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Ben Goad, about two interesting issues as of late, a blame game that's going on in a congressional race, and also the Fast and Furious committee hearings that are going on that involve Vista Congressman Darrell Issa. With us from Washington, D.C. now is our Washington, D.C. political correspondent, Ben Goad. Ben, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
There has been quite a bit of fallout since the primary relative to the 31st congressional race, where Republican State Senator Bob Dutton edged out Democrat Pete Aguilar to run against Republican Congressman Gary Miller in November, making it an all-Republican race. Now one Democrat is apparently blaming the other Democrat. Ben, what's going on here?
Right. Well, as we've discussed before on the show, this was a Democratic-leaning district, so it was a surprise when Aguilar did not get into the top two. And after he did, State Senator Gloria and Negrete McCloud pinned at least some of the blame on Congressman Joe Baca in an interview with Sacramento correspondent Jim Miller. You see, Baca technically lives in the 31st, but he's running in the more solidly Democratic 35th next door in Chino, Ontario area. So he's running there against Negrete McCloud, and she said Democrats would still have a shot at the 31st if Baca had been willing to run there.
And you had a quote from her in one of your stories that said, quote, had Mr. Baca stayed in the 31st, there wasn't any heavyweight who was going to come in that race, or come in there, end quote. And Joe Baca didn't take too kindly to her comments, correct?
He surely did not. Baca sent me a scathing statement in which he calls Negrete McCloud a, quote, very divisive and bitter person, end quote. He goes on to say that he served as a mentor to Aguilar and donated money to his campaign, which he said is a lot more than Negrete McCloud did for the cause.
And as far as his quote in your story, he said, quote, she is a very divisive and bitter person. It is easier for her to play the blame game than demonstrate actions that could have resulted in a different outcome, end quote. So indeed scathing, like you said. And curious, Ben Goad, our Washington, D.C. correspondent, has spent, I think, 6 hours today in a hearing that was going on in Congress. Ben, you attended the hearing in the House Oversight Committee where Inland Congressman Darrell Issa was pushing to hold U.S. Attorney Eric Holder in contempt of Congress, correct?
Actually, I was not there in person. I watched it over closed circuit, but yes, I did cover it. It was a 6.5-hour marathon hearing dominated by a lot of bloviating and debate.
True, and this was all over the Operation Fast and Furious investigation, which in no way involves Vin Diesel. Explain to us what exactly is going on here and why are they holding Eric Holder in contempt?
Right, well, Issa, of course, who covers much of Riverside County, has been investigating the Justice Department for over a year over its handling of the Fast and Furious investigation. This was a gun smuggling probe which federal authorities allowed firearms to go into Mexico through straw buyers. The idea was to track those guns and catch high-level criminals that they went to, but authorities lost track of as many as 2,000 guns. Some wound up in the hands of drug cartels, and 2 of them were found at a scene where a Border Patrol agent, Brian Terry, was killed in 2010, and Terry had a little bit of a local connection. He went to boot camp in Pendleton, right there near Temecula. So anyway, Issa, who's chairman of the Oversight Committee, had subpoenaed a bunch of documents intended to shed light on what Eric Holder and the other administration officials knew about the botched investigation and when they knew it. And Holder has refused to release some of them, and today's contempt vote is Issa's response to that.
And there was no lack of drama today at the hearing, correct?
No, there was not. Democrats were calling it a kangaroo court. It was very lively debate. And just minutes before the hearing began, the Justice Department delivered a letter to Issa saying that President Obama had elected to withhold the documents himself through executive privilege. This appeared to catch Issa and House Republicans a bit off guard. They went ahead with the vote anyway, and it passed by a count of 23-17, which is a party line vote.
Now, what's next then?
Well, immediately following the vote, House Speaker John Boehner announced that he was planning to hold a full House if Holder doesn't comply. And so that would be the first thing. If that passes, the case could become a criminal probe. It would go into the hands of a U.S. Attorney General here in D.C., who could convene a grand jury, and it would be extremely rare, but people seem intent on pushing this and getting those documents. So we'll watch and see what happens.
And I think you cut out just at the very beginning there, but you said that he's going to request a full House vote very shortly, correct?
That's right. The full House vote will happen next week if Holder doesn't comply with the subpoena.
Okay. Well, Ben, thanks so much for joining us today for all of those updates. And thank you, too, at home for watching another edition of Political Empire. And be sure to catch all of our updates next week and the following weeks thereafter, all the way up until the November election.